Sumy has always been a target for Russian President Vladimir Putin in his illegal invasion of Ukraine. It was one of the first regions his forces occupied in 2022. Those forces were pushed out. Fast forward to today, and Sumy is the subject of a summer offensive, one that Putin launched after finally pushing Ukraine out of Kursk. But that offensive is failing. Ukraine just put 50,000 Russian troops in the Sumy Oblast in CHECKMATE, and that means Putin's biggest goal for 2025 isn't going to be achieved. On June 26th, the Ukrainian Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky took to Facebook to provide an in-depth update about the current situation in Sumy. It's all good news for Ukraine, and that means it's all terrible news for Putin. Defending Sumy region is one of the main tasks for today, Syrsky said, before he rattled off everything that Ukraine has achieved to defend the vital region against Russia's marauding forces. According to the summaries of May-June, Syrsky wrote, "It can be noted that this year's wave of attempts of summer assault of the enemy from the territory of the Russian Federation will be drowned just as last year's, the attempt of offensive actions of the enemy in the Kharkiv region. Instead, approved earlier, our decisions already produce results. Straight away, we have a message sent from Ukraine to Russia. Your offensive is failing, just as last year's attempts to take Kharkiv failed. How badly are they failing?" Syrsky explains, "The advancement of Russian troops in the border of the Sumy region has been stopped as of this week. The line of combat confrontation is stabilized. This is huge." Syrsky is telling us that an invading force of Russian soldiers, which Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said was over 50,000 strong back in May, has been stopped in its tracks. That means Putin can't rely on these soldiers to take Sumy. He can't even rely on them to stretch the lines of the Ukraine war to place more pressure elsewhere in the country. The Russian offensive is stalled, and the 50,000 soldiers Putin thought would be enough to take Sumy are now stuck. And the reason Ukraine has achieved this checkmate is the same reason it's been able to defend itself against Russia so well for over 3 years. It uses better tactics than Putin is capable of coming up with. Syrsky hails the active defense tactics Ukraine's forces put in place, noting that a combination of offensive actions and smart fortifications have led to the Russian advance faltering. On the offensive side, Ukraine has been hitting Kursk to force Putin into diverting some of the troops he dedicated to Sumy back to a Russian region he believed he'd fully recaptured. Our offensive actions in the Glushkovo district of the Kursk region forced the enemy to send a certain part of the troops to defend their territory, Syrsky wrote. This significantly reduced the offensive capabilities of the main grouping of enemy troops in the Sumy direction. Syrsky is likely speaking about the contingent of Ukrainian forces that are still occupying parts of Kursk here. Putin claims that Russia has eradicated Ukraine from Kursk. He's wrong. According to Syrsky, as reported by Canal 13, Ukraine still holds about 35 square miles of Kursk, almost all of which is in the Glushkovo region. That Glushkovo operation has not only slowed down the Sumy incursion, but has also forced Putin to redirect troops he intended to send toward Pokrovsk. Our active operations in the Glushkovo district of Kursk Oblast disrupted these plans. As a result, those units were not relocated to other directions. One of the brigades already moving toward the Pokrovsk direction was returned to Kursk, Canal 13 reported Syrsky as saying. 2 birds, 1 stone. What this tells us is that Ukraine is still very active in Kursk, and it's using that activity to wreak havoc with Putin's troop deployments. In doing so, Ukraine is protecting the vital city of Pokrovsk, which is a logistical hub that many see as key to Putin's ambitions in Donetsk. Plus, as Syrsky points out, the more Russian troops that are engaged with Ukraine's forces in Glushkovo, the fewer Russian troops that are able to launch offensives in Sumy. There's more. Fortifications are a massive priority for Ukraine, and it's been hard at work while its forces distract Putin's troops in Kursk. In the command of our grouping in the North Slobozansky direction, a special defense group of Sumy region was created, cities and communities of the region. The primary task is to strengthen fortifications, the extension of the system of engineering and fortification fences, Syrsky said. This tells us that Ukraine isn't focused solely on using offense to push Putin's forces away from Sumy. It knows that Putin will order more attacks, despite 50,000 of his troops already being in checkmate. When those attacks come, Ukraine will be ready. It's building fortifications as we speak. Plus, as Syrsky points out, Ukraine has also organized the people it needs to get those fortifications in place. Also appointed an official who will be directly responsible for preparing cities and communities of Sumy region for defense and ensuring the effectiveness of the system of engineering fences in the alleged directions of the enemy's attack. The Deputy of Engineering Fortification Equipment has been appointed, Syrsky reported in his Facebook post. Building these fortifications is still a work in progress, Ukraine's commander-in-chief points out, but it's work that can now continue unabated. Putin's forces are tied up elsewhere. They already face strong fortifications on the Sumy outskirts. If they somehow manage to break through, This new round of fortifications will simply force Russia's forces into a meat grinder from which there is no escape. And there's more coming, lots more. Building additional fortification structures, organizing a kill zone, building anti-drone corridors to protect our soldiers, and ensuring more reliable logistics for our troops are obvious tasks that are being done. But the efficiency of these tasks must become significantly more. I will be back with the verification within a specific period, Sumy added. Again, we see just how organized Ukraine's defenses are. With fortifications in place come opportunities to create openings for the country's troops. The anti-drone corridors may allow Ukraine's forces to skirt around Russia's invaders, potentially catching them in pincer movements that allow Ukraine to attack from both sides. Failing that, they'll at least provide areas of safe passage for Ukraine's soldiers, where they don't have to worry about Russia's drones. As for the kill zones, Ukraine has used them before, and they're extremely effective. For instance, June 26th brought with it a report from Euromaidan Press that a 23-vehicle assault carried out by Russia had fallen to one of Ukraine's kill zones in the Donetsk region. Of the 23 vehicles, 18 were destroyed in less than 3 hours. Ukraine has a brilliant strategy here. Its kill zones aligned with barbed wire, landmines, and a host of other defensive measures that force Russia's troops to a standstill. Once the Russians are stopped, drones and artillery pepper the kill zone, killing any caught up in the blasts while forcing the withdrawal of any survivors. Ukraine uses its fortifications to funnel Russia's forces into these kill zones, making them practically unavoidable if Putin wants his troops to push forward. Kill zones are deadly, effective, and, according to Kursk, Ukraine now has one in Sumy. He praised the many Ukrainian soldiers involved in the Sumy defense and left Putin with a clear message to mull over. Together we stand, together we win, glory to Ukraine. All of this will be a huge shot to Putin. Following the Kursk invasion, Putin was embarrassed. He was humiliated by the fact that Ukraine had managed to pull off the first invasion of Russian soil since World War II. As the BBC reports, Putin's aim after pushing most of Ukraine's forces out of Kursk was to create security buffer zones along the border into Kursk that will prevent Ukraine from pulling off something similar again. Sumy has been one of Putin's targets because it's one of those border areas. By taking Sumy, or at least by snatching up enough territory in the oblast, Putin gets his buffer zone and can protect Kursk. At least, that was the plan. Putin's summer offensive was even gaining some ground before Kursk made his announcement. On June 2nd, the Deep State Telegram channel reported that May had been Russia's best month for territorial gains in all of 2025. The resource claims that Russia managed to claim a little over 173 square miles of Ukrainian territory, much of it in Sumy, during that month, which was a substantial increase over the 77 square miles per month gains that Ukraine had limited Russia to achieving between February and April. The largest amount of territory was lost in the area of the enemy's breakthrough on the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka highway, where about 200 square kilometers were occupied, as well as the Katsap offensive operation in Sumy region, where at least 110 square kilometers were lost by the end of the month. These two areas account for 70% of all territorial losses, Deep State reports. Putin felt like he had momentum. After several months of grinding for scraps, his forces were finally taking more substantial chunks of Ukraine's territory. Russia's leader believed all of this was a precursor for the rest of the summer. More of Sumy would fall and Putin would have the buffer zone he covets. Only that's not going to happen. Rather than advancing, Russia's troops are being forced to pull back to defend territory in Kursk that they thought they controlled. They were also being held up by Ukrainian fortifications, and now that Ukraine is quickly working on developing more fortifications along with kill zones, that will inevitably lead to more Russian casualties. Those are casualties Russia can't afford to absorb. The country has already broken through the 1 million mark, losing 1,016,720 of its troops as of June 26th, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance. What was supposed to be a rapid summer advance will become a meat grinder, one that will lead to practically no gains for Russia, as the 50,000 soldiers Putin dedicated to Sumy are now caught in Ukraine's checkmate. Putin's goals aren't going to be achieved this summer. But what are those goals? We've touched on one already. Putin wants to create a buffer zone in Sumy that Russia can use to protect its border territories. The Kyiv Independent reported on this on June 14th, noting that Russia had briefly maintained the momentum it developed in May into the early stages of June. During the first 2 weeks of the month, it said, Russia had managed to draw within 12.4 miles of the Sumy Oblast's capital city and had captured several villages along the way. The same outlet notes that creating a buffer zone likely wasn't Putin's only goal. As Ukraine responded to Russia's Sumy incursions, it started basing troops and equipment in border settlements. That spike in Ukrainian military activity forced a response from Russia, which has intensified its strikes against those settlements to eradicate the Ukrainian troops. Those strikes have clearly failed. Ukraine's border settlements served as a launching pad for a renewed counter-invasion of Kursk that has helped to stop Russia's Sumy advances in their tracks. What we do know is that a direct assault on a city the size of Sumy is currently out of Russia's reach, at least according to Emil Kustahelmi, a member of the Finnish open-source intelligence collective Blackbird Group. He tells the Kyiv Independent that Sumy, which had a pre-war population of 255,000, is far too large for a contingent of 50,000 Russian soldiers to take. The Russians haven't been able to actually capture any large cities in Ukraine since 2022, with the surrounding and capture of Mariupol in Donetsk Oblast, he told the Kyiv Independent. What they can do is put heavy pressure on the Sumy direction and try to gain as much land as possible in order to bring Sumy into range of artillery and drones, tying Ukrainian troops into defensive battles and giving Russia some leverage in upcoming negotiations. Therein lies another reason for Putin's summer offensive. Russia and Ukraine have been engaged in a round of potential peace talks in Turkey over the last few weeks. Those talks haven't amounted to anything resembling a ceasefire yet. Instead, the two countries have agreed to a prisoner exchange involving 1,000 people, with Euromaidan press reporting that US officials believe the negotiations have reached a dead end. Putin has claimed in the past that Ukraine needs to meet all of Russia's demands to have any hope of achieving peace. Those demands include a full Ukrainian withdrawal from 4 regions Russia currently occupies, which include the previously mentioned Donetsk, along with Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Putin also wants Ukraine to place limitations on its armed forces and is demanding that Ukraine's Western partners lift sanctions and unfreeze Russian assets held abroad. These demands are obviously unacceptable to Ukraine. However, Putin was hoping that the territory his forces captured in Sumy during his summer offensive would give him leverage. Taking Sumy itself was never the goal. You could even argue that all of Putin's talk about building a buffer zone was secondary. Pressure was the key for Putin. The more damage he could cause during the summer, the weaker Ukraine would be during future negotiations. Now that's all been turned on its head. Russia's forces have been halted in Sumy, with the best Putin can now hope for being the occasional slice of territory that won't make much of a difference in the grand scheme of the war. Worse yet for Russia's leader. Siersky says that Ukraine is holding on to territory in Kursk, which not only diverts Russia's forces, but also gives Ukraine much-needed leverage in future negotiations. The summer offensive is a flop, and some saw all of this coming. In April, The Telegraph published an article claiming that several experts believed that Putin's Sumy offensive was doomed to fail. One of those experts, executive director of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center, Dmytro Zhmylo, told the outlet, "For now, any offensive by Russia on the front line is impossible. Russia does not have any big military victories on the front line, so they want to give the impression that there are huge movements and advantages. We do not see this on the ground." The summer offensive may have all been a smokescreen, any effort by Putin to hide the fact that his troops have made no real advances for months, and plenty of people knew it. Another was John Hardy, who directs the Russia program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Like Zhmylo, he believed that Russia's efforts in Sumy wouldn't amount to much. "What we're seeing is just a surge in assault tempo. It's very small scale," Hardy told The Telegraph. "They can chop a hole in the Ukrainian line, but they're not able to punch through that hole and achieve a rapid, operational, significant breakthrough." Both he and Zhmylo were right on the money. Since those comments were made, we've seen the surge. We've seen Russia capture a little more territory in May and June than it had during the previous months. But now the smokescreen is gone, vanished into the air, never to be seen again. In its place are powerful Ukrainian defenses and a renewed fight in Kursk that have combined to stall Putin's summer offensive before it achieved anything of note. How could it get any worse for Russia's leader? Simple, Ukraine isn't resting on its laurels. Beyond pushing Putin's forces into a checkmate situation, Ukraine is using Russia's weakness to reclaim territory Russia believed it had captured. That's according to Euromaidan Press, which wrote on June 22nd that Ukraine has already retaken the village of Andriivka, which Russia managed to hold for just a matter of days before losing it again. And Ukraine isn't stopping there. In a renewed push toward the Russian border, Ukraine now has another settlement named Unraveled in its sights. Ukraine is gaining ground during a Russian offensive that was supposed to see Putin's forces snatch up more territory. You can find out more about both of these settlements and what Ukraine is doing in them in our video titled "Ukraine Liberated Andriivka, Unraveled is Next." Putin's summer offensive has collapsed. His attempts to form a buffer zone and gain leverage over Ukraine lie in ruins. Neither is going to happen. Instead, Russia's forces are clogged up fighting against Ukrainian troops in Kursk, while their Sumy advance has ground to a standstill. It's Ukraine that is now building momentum. Ukraine is taking, or retaking, key pieces of territory. And when the next round of talks happen, Putin will be able to do little more than repeat his outrageous demands with nothing in Sumy to back them up. And that brings us to what comes next. There's no timescale for any future talks between Russia and Ukraine. The ceasefire has shifted out of US focus too, especially as the US is currently more focused on the Middle East crisis and resolving the conflict between Israel and Iran. However, there are signs that US President Donald Trump is preparing to offer more support for Ukraine. On June 26, the BBC reported that Trump had held a meeting with Zelensky the previous day during the NATO summit held at The Hague. That meeting couldn't have been nicer, Trump exclaimed to the BBC after the summit. The US president also claimed that he was considering supplying Ukraine with more Patriot missiles, which would reinforce the country's air defenses and make Putin's aerial strikes against Sumy even less effective. We're going to see if we can make some available. You know, they're very hard to get. While the missiles matter, it's the sentiment here that will disturb Putin. If leverage against Ukraine is one of the main goals of the summer offensive, he has categorically failed to achieve that goal. His troops are at a standstill, and the US president is talking about ways his country can help Ukraine to bat Russia's forces back. This was supposed to be the summer of Putin. Instead, it may prove to be the summer of his ruin. If you're interested in learning more about that NATO summit, we've published a video in which we examine the key message NATO sent to Ukraine earlier in the week. We're not done yet. Check out the video to learn more, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering the latest developments in the Ukraine war.